Well, hey guys, we did it. We have come to the end of the book of Genesis. And for those who are new, this is message number 44, and really a 4-year journey through what has been a wild book of the Bible. I was thinking about this week. I've spent some 700 hours studying this book and teaching it to you. And I know some of you are like, it has felt like I have spent 700 hours listening to messages through this book of the Bible. But seriously, I'm going to miss it. And I hope that as we leave Genesis, that you have some key takeaways for your life. And one way just to practically grab hold of that is on the way home today or at Gospel Community this week, you could talk about what are one or two takeaways from Genesis that you want to hang on to for the rest of your life. There's a lot to choose from because we've covered a lot of ground over the last 4 years. We started 4 years ago by looking at creation and really the creation of the world. And the question there is, why is there so much beauty in the world? If the world was created kind of by warfare amongst the gods, which was kind of the creation myth at the time that the Bible was written, or to modernize it, we would say, why is there so much beauty in the world if life is an accident that just kind of randomly sparked into existence? Why do we feel love for our children? Why do we feel moved when we see the sunsets like we did this week? What Genesis is going to say about that is that this world has been designed by a good God to move your heart to sing because he is good and he makes good and he loves us and he wants good for us. And so we looked at those opening chapters of Genesis, and you guys tried to help me convince Karen to get a golden retriever, and that didn't work. But seriously, that's not what those opening chapters are about. Those opening chapters are about why is there beauty. And then we moved from there into the fall, and we looked at why is the world so messed up? Why is there so much pain around us? And Genesis stepped into that space and said, sin is the problem, a lack of a relationship with God is. And then from there, we moved on into the flood and then God's work through the lives of the patriarchs from Abraham to Isaac and to Jacob. And last week, we saw the end of the life of the last patriarch. Jacob has now died, and we saw that on his deathbed, he blessed his sons and he prophesied about how God will continue to work through the nation of Israel that comes from this family in the future, that he has 12 sons. There will now be 12 tribes of Israel. And we looked at this incredible prophecy that God's going to keep working through Israel. He's going to keep working in history just like he has been to undo sin, to bring about good, and ultimately through Israel to bring about the Lion of the tribe of Judah, who is Jesus, very good. And Jesus will come, according to Jacob's prophecy from last week, to undo everything that's been lost in the fall, to restore life as it was made to be. And so at this point, you would think Genesis is over. We got the foundations, and we are ready to now turn the page to Exodus and see how God continues to work through the people of Israel. Or if you're impatient, jump to the New Testament to see how Jesus comes and does it all. You would think you're ready to turn the page. And yet, we have one final story here in Genesis. And what I think this last story is designed to do is it's here to really kind of pull together all the things we've covered in Genesis so far. I was thinking about this week, I think it's almost like the perfect series finale to the book of Genesis. And so if you are just joining us and you're here today and you're like, Genesis sounds awesome, you can get all 40 plus messages available on our website for free. Just know you get what you pay for. But seriously, there are some incredible stories we have covered. And for those of you who have been here, my hope is that this message today, it might just bring it all together and by the power of the Holy Spirit, drive the truths of this great book of beginnings home in our soul in a way that would just set us up to soar in life with Jesus. Are you ready to dive into it? All right, Genesis chapter 50, here we go, verse 1. Then Joseph fell on his face and he wept over him, that's his father Jacob, and he kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel, that's Jacob's nickname. For 40 days were required for it, for that is how many are required for embalming, and the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. So we pick up the story here where we left off last week, and what we have is Jacob has just died, and we get in the opening verses here, Joseph, his son, is weeping, the Egyptians are weeping. It goes on for a long time. And the point here is this is yet another reminder in Genesis that death is not natural. Death is not a part of the world as God made it. Death is an intruder that has come into God's good world through sin. And I've pointed this out to you a few times in Genesis because we live in a world that's so afraid of death. We write cartoons and sing songs about how death is just a part of the circle of life and there's nothing to worry about. It's totally natural. And I love The Lion King. It's a great movie. I mean, you got the Lion of the tribe of Judah. You got a Lion King there. But that's a terrible song to say death is a part of the circle of life. And I think deep down we all know this, that death isn't natural. And so I always want to step into that space and say, don't buy the lie from our culture that death is normal, that this is how it's supposed to happen. Believe what the Bible says, that God made us for life and love, and that death and sin and pain is taking us away from God's plan. And so if I could say it this way, there is nothing lacking faith to cry when someone you love dies. In fact, I actually think it takes faith to get honest with your emotions and say, this sucks, I miss this person, this isn't right. It is an act of faith what Joseph is doing here to mourn, because he's saying, though we've seen death as long as we can remember, there is a time where there was death, and I believe there will be a time where there is death no more once again, but in the in-between, I'm gonna miss Dad. And so he mourns. This is an act of faith, but notice this is not the only act of faith we see from Joseph here. Verse 4. And when the days of weeping for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, if now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, saying, I'm about to die. In my tomb that I have hewed out for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now therefore, please let me go up and bury my father. Then I will return. So this goes back to what we saw last week, that Jacob, before he died, he made his sons promise to bury him, not in Egypt, but in the land of Canaan. This is the land that God promised to Abraham, his grandfather, and Isaac, his father. And so for Jacob, this was his way of dying in faith, to say, hey, I trust God's promises. I trust that he brought us to Egypt for a time, but he will bring us out of this place like he told me. And I want you to bury me there so that when God brings you there, I will be there with you too. And Joseph, for his part, he does what his dad asks. He goes to bury his father, and he goes through this whole process to get Pharaoh to allow it. It's not like he just had a bunch of time off from work. Remember, Joseph is the guy that's basically in charge of people not starving to death in Egypt. But he goes to Pharaoh, and he says, look, hey, this is important to bury my dad here. This is important to our faith, and I want you to see this. This is an act of faith where he's saying, he weeps because he knows that death isn't natural, but he also is going through great lengths to bury his father in the land of promise, because Joseph knows death itself is not the end. There will come a time where God will rise up and bring his people out of Egypt back into the land of promise. There will come a time where God will reunite heaven and earth, and death itself will be overturned. And when death is overturned and we walk out of the tombs, we want to be together. This is what Joseph is saying here. And what we're seeing, I would submit to you, this is really just kind of a picture of how Christians grieve. We grieve because death isn't natural, and we're going to miss the ones we love. So it's natural to cry like Joseph, and yet we don't grieve as those without hope, as the New Testament will say, because we know our God is greater than the grave, and he is too good to allow death to have the last word. He is, as Jesus will say, when it says he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he says he is not the God of the dead, but the living. He is the good God who creates life, and he will bring his people back. This is what Joseph is grabbing onto as he buries his father here. Verse 6. So then Pharaoh answered him, "Go up and bury your father as he made you swear." So Pharaoh is not a Christian. He doesn't believe this talk of resurrection, but Joseph has been such a blessing to the land of Egypt that Pharaoh's like, "Hey, buddy, whatever you need, take the time off. You're my best employee. You've got the PTO banked. You go and do what you need to do." And now I want you to notice just how many people are impacted by what is essentially Jacob's funeral that we're about to read about here. Look with me at verse 7. So Joseph went up to bury his father. With him went up the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as the household of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's household. Only their children and their flocks and their herds were left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen. It was a very great company. When they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they lamented there with a very great and grievous lamentation. And he made a mourning for his father for 7 days because death is not natural. Verse 11, when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning on the threshing floor of Atad, they said, "This is a grievous mourning by the Egyptians." Therefore, the place was named Abel Mizraim. It is beyond the Jordan. Now, we don't get a ton of detail on the lives of the people that were mentioned in that verse there, but I don't want you to miss this. They literally renamed an entire city because of Jacob's funeral. Safe to say it made an impression. Fair? On a ton of people. And I'm telling you, as a pastor, I've seen this all of the time. When I first started in ministry, I loved getting to do weddings. Because weddings are a happy day. Everyone's having a great time. The couple is like all smiles. They have no idea what's ahead of them. I mean, and I still love doing weddings. Weddings are fun. It's such an honor to get to be a part of doing that. But something I didn't realize when I started in ministry was how powerful funerals are. And look, you may not have as many people attend your funeral as Jacob does here. But I don't want you to miss this point. Your funeral will preach a sermon. Even if you don't have a funeral, that will preach a sermon. Your funeral, however you do it, is going to send a message to the world around you. And I know this is such a weird topic to talk about, but man, I was sitting with this story this week, and I got my girls together, and I gave them instructions for my funeral like Jacob did with Joseph here. And one of them was like, "Why are we talking about this?" And the other one like got out pen and paper and started taking notes. And yeah, you knew which ones that was, huh? She was just listening. The third one was just listening intently. And because here's the deal, like, you never know when your day's going to come. And I know we can laugh at that, and I hope that I get to tell them many more times about these instructions, but you never know when your day's going to come. And guys, I was sitting with this story, and I was just like, I don't want to waste my funeral. And so I gave my girls, here's some things I want you to make sure happens. To grieve, but in a very Christian way that lifts the hearts of everyone there with the hope of the gospel. That Jesus is victorious over the grave, that this isn't the end, that we'll see Dad again because Jesus is awesome. And so that's kind of what's going on in the story here. Jacob's boys bury him like he asked, and an entire city is renamed because of it. And then they head back to Egypt, and now we're going to see the end of Joseph's life. Skip down with me to verse 22. We're starting to wrap things up here. So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years. Now, the commentators will point out that 110, the Egyptians loved this number. I do not know why. For them, they thought 110 was the ideal lifespan. And so what the text is doing here is it's saying Joseph, he lived to a good old age. People saw the age he lived to, and they were like, that's awesome. I don't know what number you'd put on it. This is the number the Egyptians did. And God was like, I'm going to get you there just so everyone marvels. Verse 23. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. So Ephraim is his son, and he sees his children of the third generation. So he's hanging out with his great-grandkids. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, that's his other son, were counted as Joseph's own. So I don't think you need to be a Bible scholar to get the picture here. Is the scene winds down and the sun begins to set on Joseph's life. Here's the picture. Joseph is hanging on the porch with his great-grandkids sitting in his lap. And I don't want you to miss this. They're in Egypt, but they have Hebrew names. Now, we're kind of random with how we name our kids nowadays. Back then, your name meant everything. And so what's going on here is you've got Jacob, or excuse me, I keep saying Jacob, Joseph. Jacob's dead, he was last week. This is Joseph. He's sitting there on the porch with his great-grandson in his lap, with a Hebrew name in a foreign land, meaning that faith that began with his great-granddaddy Abraham went down through Isaac, went down through Jacob, went through Joseph's life. It went into his son's life. It went into his son's son's life, and it went into his son's son's life. And to the third generation, Joseph is seeing, God is blessing my family. They're getting this whole God thing better than I did. They love him. They're walking with him. This man is incredibly blessed. Amen? These are life goals right here. That you'd get to meet your great-grandkids, that they would love Jesus like you do. This is the point of these final verses. Joseph is very, very blessed. And one of the great themes we've seen throughout the book of Genesis is this idea of blessing. Page 1 of the Bible, God creates the first humans, and then what does he tell them? He blesses them. He says, be fruitful and multiply. And as you continue on in Genesis, this word for blessed is used more than 80 times. God just shows up and he's like Oprah. He's like, I bless you, I bless you, I bless you, I bless you. God is a God who loves to bless is a theme we have seen throughout the book of Genesis. And here as the book comes to a close, we see that Joseph, after all that he has been through, after all the pain and the suffering and the hardship, all of it being so confusing and so painful, here in the end, we see he dies a happy old man hanging out with his great-grandkids, telling them about Jesus. Joseph, in the end, is very blessed because God is a God who loves to bless his people. And unless you take that and say, okay, well, if I love Jesus, then I'm going to be super duper rich. Remember, it doesn't work that way in Genesis. Joseph went through slavery and decades to get here. The point is that God will bless us in the end. He will get us in the end. And the journey to get there might not make sense to you, but this is where the story all ends for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Joseph is very, very blessed. And now we get to read his final words, verse 24. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land he swore to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you. He's like, God's really going to do this, guys, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. And they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. I don't know about you. That right there is how I want to go out. Not the bit about embalming. The part where Joseph dies in faith like his daddy. And on his deathbed, he is there proclaiming the goodness and the faithfulness of God all the way until his last breath. The last recorded conversation is, guys, God has been so good to us. He has been so faithful that I know that he will fulfill the word he gave to Dad about bringing us out of this place. So when he fulfills that word, please bring my bones with you. I don't want to stay in Egypt. I want to be with the family when the resurrection occurs. He dies in faith like his daddy, and he goes out proclaiming the goodness and faithfulness of Jesus, and his great-grandkids are there to see it. It's a beautiful picture. And it's a beautiful ending to a really complex book. And I'd love to just close it and say, well, there's your story. Genesis, everyone. And in some sense, that is the final note. We will come back to this. This is the final note here, but I don't know if you noticed, I skipped a few verses. Because it wouldn't be Genesis without some drama. And seriously, like, all jokes aside, I think one of the reasons Genesis is such a powerful book is because it speaks with such honesty to the raw reality of human life. That yes, we're made in the image of God. Yes, we have great potential to love our families and to build them up and to go out praising Jesus and encouraging others. Yes, that world exists, but also we have the fall. And Genesis gives us story after story after story that is really honest about how the effects of sin have gotten into all of us. And so even in this final story, it is going to end in a beautiful place. I showed you that up front for a reason so that you would know the whole plane lands. It's going to be fine. And now I want to show you one final piece in this last story in Genesis. One final piece of tension here. Verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, so this takes us back to the ending of that funeral earlier, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin because they did evil to you. And now, please forgive the transgression of the servants of God, of your father." Question, is that true? No. Awesome. Several of you were here last week. Yes, that's not true. That story never happened. For those of you who weren't here, Joseph was at his daddy's deathbed until he died. Joseph loved his father. He was there. If dad had a word like this, dad could have told it to him. And notice the narrator doesn't say, the brothers told him this thing. He says the brothers freaked out, and so they came up with a plan, and then they told him this thing. Jacob did not say this to Joseph. And frankly, Jacob did not have to say this to Joseph because Jacob knew that Joseph had forgiven his brothers. He didn't have to remind them, hey, by the way, when I'm gone, don't kill them. He knew his son's heart. He knew that he was forgiven. But here's what's going on here. Joseph's brothers don't know this. Or I don't know if you can relate to this at all. Maybe they knew it, but then they started to doubt it. Where the text tells us at some point they have this moment where they start to go, maybe this is too good to be true. I mean, after all we did to Joseph, is he really just going to let that go? Is he going to wake up one day and change his mind about us? Is he going to get tired of us? And so the text tells us they start to reason that maybe Joseph was just pretending to be nice while dad was alive. But now that dad is gone, our protection is gone. And so they freak out. They think, oh my goodness, this is going to go very badly for us. And rather than pray and talk to God about it, or rather than talk to Joseph and have a relationship with their brother like a normal human being, they withdraw from relationship and they fall back into some old habits where they come together and make a plot against Joseph. This time to try to manipulate him using the memory of their dead father. And look at Joseph's reaction. back at verse 17, it says, Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Because it's like after all this time, they still don't know their brother. After all this time, they still stand against him, 11-1. This is exactly how it looked when we first picked up the Joseph narrative in chapter 37. You have Joseph's brothers over here and Joseph over here, and they're scheming and they're plotting and they're planning, and here's Joseph. And it's like all the progress we've seen over the last several chapters and the last several decades contained in those chapters. For a moment, it looks like all that progress is gone. And you need to know this about life. Because it's not that all the progress is gone, but you need to know this. Sometimes this will happen in life where you begin to make progress in your life, that by God's grace, things begin to change. And then things begin to change, things begin to change, things begin to change. And as things are looking better, there can come a day where you have a bad day and you take a step backwards. Has anyone had this experience? You guys have gotten so much more honest as we're going through Genesis. Either that or you're more sinful now, I don't know. I'm so encouraged by that just now, because I'd throw two hands up for that. The Christian life, it so often feels like 2 steps forward. All right, Jesus, 1 step back. Good grief. This is a dynamic we all experience. And here's what I want you to notice. Do you see how everyone's laughing now? This is not just a dynamic you experience. This is a dynamic everyone experiences. And see, here's the thing. Relationships begin to grow toxic and die when we forget this. When all we do in relationship is notice the steps back that others take, and we become experts on their faults and keep a careful list of wrongs, and we don't notice all the progress and all the forward movement, if we skip all the good things we've seen in the last several chapters and just go 37 and Genesis 50, these brothers suck. If all you do is focus on the bad days and the faults of others, you will begin to think the people in your life are monsters. And so, I just want to put this in context. For years now, Joseph and his brothers have been reconciled. They have been, you remember we saw, they moved in on the same street together. They raised their kids on the same little league team. They watched the Niners games together. And look, I'm sure this is not the first time Joseph's brothers did something shady to him in all of those years. My point is, these guys messed up here big time. And Joseph now has a choice. Will he ignore all that God has done in their relationship over the past several years and focus just on the fault? Or will he continue to focus on God, to see what's happening, and to continue to be gracious and loving and merciful and kind like God has been to him? This is the tension of the final story. Is the rug about to be pulled out from underneath us? Verse 18. His brothers also came and fell down before him, and they said, "Behold, we are your servants." Does anybody remember what got Joseph into trouble in the first place all those years ago? His brothers had a dream about bowing down before him like this. And Joseph, being a little young, a little immature maybe, he went and bragged to them about that dream, said, "Guys, I had the craziest dream from God. You'll never believe this dream." And that moment, that set into motion really everything we've been looking at in this series. They lost their minds. They sold him into slavery. In slavery, he rises up, and then Potiphar's wife goes crazy and puts him in jail unjustly. And on and on and on the cycle goes. And here we are decades later, and these brothers are now acting out the dream for the third time. I have to wonder, just as a sidebar, if it ever dawns on them, like, okay, so we didn't want to bow to him. Did we bring this about? Because selling him into slavery, they end up doing the very thing that, anyway, okay. So they're bowing to him for the third time. And here's Joseph. He's a wise, older man. And he's no longer bragging about it. Like, do you know how easy it would be to say, how's my feet smell, brothers? You'll be my servants. I mean, you won't be very good ones. Gosh, you brought Dad's name into this? Like, I'm glad to see you suffer right now. He totally could have said all that. But watch what he does here, verse 19. But Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? This is what we said was at the heart of forgiveness a few weeks ago. Joseph says, I am not going to hold on to bitterness and resentment against you anymore. I am not going to stand in God's place and pronounce judgment over you. Not for what you did back then, not for what you're doing right now with Dad's memory. He says, I'm going to leave this one with God. It is his job to judge. It is not my job to judge. And so he says, guys, I have already forgiven you. I still forgive you. I'm not going to take the God spot in your life. God is good. He is in heaven. He can sort this stuff out. Let's be brothers together. He reminds them, I've forgiven you. You don't have to be afraid. I'm not going to make you my slaves. If I wanted to do that, I would have done that years ago when you guys still maybe had a few years of solid labor in you. Like, no, I'm not going to do this. And if you hear this and you're like, how does this guy keep forgiving his brothers? Look with me at verse 20 now, because this is, I believe, one of the most important verses in all of Genesis. In some ways, I think it really just sums the whole book up. Verse 20. As for you, he's talking to his brothers, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Two things I want us to see from that verse. Two things that if we can see them, I think we can grab what Genesis is trying to tell us. Number one, you have to have a category for evil. Some people, I talk to some people and it's like, it feels like they read Genesis 1 and 2 and didn't get any farther. That their view of humans is human beings are great and full of potential, and if we just give people enough chances, everything is going to be rainbows and Skittles and sunshine and lollipops for everyone. And it's like, yes, God made us in his image and there's great potential in humans, but did you keep reading the story? Genesis 3 happens. Sin comes in, fractures the world. And that fracturing isn't just external to us. Sin invades the human hearts to where now Romans 1 will say it this way, the desires of our heart are bent. So the problem is not just that his brothers wanted a good thing and accidentally did wrong. What Joseph says is, no, you intended evil. You wanted a bad thing to happen. You have to have a category for this idea of evil. We have to be able to look at the actions of other people and even our own and say, that was evil. That was not okay. Because otherwise, hear me, you will go crazy if you don't have a category for evil. Because we live in a world full of evil. And if you can't put a name on it and say, that is evil, that is unjust, that is not right, that is not okay with God and is one of God's people, that is not okay with me. If you don't have a category for evil and you just want to live in rainbows and sunshine land, you will go crazy in this broken world. And I would submit to you, the only way healing begins is by looking evil in the eye and calling it what it is. The world never changed by people putting their heads in the ground and saying, everything's fine, I'm sure it's okay. The world changes when Christians stand on the Bible and say, this is not okay with God, this is evil, we're going to do something about it because we're God's people, we love God, and we want to see God's ways on the earth. And it's real easy to talk about that in an out there sense, but we've got to be able to say it about our own lives too. That was evil, that was wrong, I shouldn't have done that. We have to be able to say, I'm sorry. This is where things begin to change, when you can name it and say that wasn't okay. And I point this out because where we're going here with the second thing, some people just want to skip past evil and pretend it's not there. In the same way we want to pretend death isn't coming, we want to skip past evil. And I'm telling you, what Genesis has been telling you is don't ignore it. Lean into it. Call it what it is, see it for what it is, but catch us, you cannot only do that. If all you have is a category for evil, I'm telling you, you will end up bitter, angry, jaded, frustrated with the world because there is a lot of evil in our world to be upset about. And people will intend evil against you, just like you will intend evil against them, by the way. And if all your focus is on that, you can grow bitter. And so, yes, we have to be able to say, that was evil, that was not okay, this is not okay with God, but we cannot end there. Number two, you have to have a category for the sovereignty of God. And we've been talking about this for several weeks now. So when you hear the word sovereignty, I hope you're starting to hear God is the ultimate power in the universe. That's what we've been saying this word sovereignty means, that God reigns as king over the universe, that he created it, that nothing can happen without it going through his hand, that God is in control, that nothing happens outside of his control. And this is why I say you have to have a category for God's sovereignty, because here's what I've noticed. When you have a category for evil and you can name, that's evil, that shouldn't happen. What I think a lot of us tend to do is where we see evil, we begin to shrink God in our own estimation. What I mean by that is we say, God can't possibly be in control of that. That's evil. God can't be okay with that. So that must be the thing in the universe that is outside of God's control. And this is why words like sovereignty make us uncomfortable, where we go, ooh, God's really in control, but there's some gnarly things in the world. And so we want to slip, we almost picture God as an ambulance driver constantly showing up to the scene after something happens. But I want you to notice that's not Joseph's solution. And if I can say it this way, as understandable as it is to, I'll be real with you, in my Christian journey, I have had, and even preaching this series, I struggle with the concept of God's sovereignty at times. Because I look at my life and I'm like, I'm 37, I could have engineered better than that. Not saying this isn't the preacher from the book, this is the human over here. Going, God, I can't imagine you're possibly bringing something good from that. And so I've wanted, and there are theological systems you can find that'll say, well, God's like the ambulance driver. He shows up afterwards, and it shrinks God down to a size that it really glorifies evil and it lessens God. And I don't think that's anyone's intent, but I want to speak to you from my heart to say, I get it. I get where the idea of God sovereignly controlling all of history can rub us the wrong way, because we look at history and we say, this is not the universe I would have set up. But if I could just speak to your heart, and this, by the way, I need to read verse 21. This is what Joseph is doing here. He's not trying to give them some theological doctrine that Christians will struggle with thousands of years from now. Look at verse 21. It says, do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. That literally could be translated, he spoke to their hearts. And so let me speak to your hearts. Where you've seen sovereignty on the wall in this series and gone, oh boy, here we go. where we shrink God in our imagination and begin to just tell ourselves, God's not in control of that. He wouldn't allow that. Here's what happens every time. When God gets smaller, anxiety gets bigger. Because I want you to think about this. If God is not in control of the universe, then who needs to be in control? You do. And I'm speaking to you from my heart to your heart. That I don't think a lot of this is conscious, but I think we think, okay, if God's not in control of that, I have to be in control of that. And anxiety gets bigger. And we start to worry and freak out about our lives. We start to worry, will it be okay with my kids? Will I see them to the third generation? What if I send them to the wrong school? What if I do this? And we start to worry and freak out. And either we have to be in control of our lives or God help us. We tap some politician to be in control of our lives to work it all out. If you can relate to this idea of feeling anxious at all, and maybe you're not sure what you think about God's sovereignty, let me just point out to you Joseph's solution. Rather than shrinking God down to a size, or he's not responsible for the evil in the world, but he's also not really able to help anybody because he's not big enough. What Joseph does is he grows his vision of God. He says, okay, God didn't intend this for evil. Note, he never says God intends evil. The Bible is clear. God is not the author of evil. He said, you're a real agent. You make real moral choices. You intended for evil. And yet God is in control of the universe. If he wanted to, he could have shut it down. But God allowed it because according to Joseph, God meant your evil for good. This is Joseph's vision of God. He doesn't get God off the hook by saying, God just can't touch that stuff. He stretches his mind to see God is bigger than I thought, that this did not look good to me, but if God allowed it, he allowed it for a reason to bring about a good that I cannot imagine. And this is what Joseph is getting at when he says, what you meant for evil, God meant it for good. He's saying, if God allowed it, man, this was really evil. This was not okay. But if God allowed it, he must have been working this whole time to bring about such a great goodness that I couldn't have even imagined when I was in it. This is who Joseph's God is. He is so good, he can bring good even out of evil. He can take what his brothers intend to harm him, and he can take it and redirect it and use it to save millions of people's lives. This is the story we've been looking at for the last several weeks. And I want you to notice, it is not just Joseph who says this. Prayed about where to go here. There is, let me give an example. There is a woman named Corrie ten Boom who suffered during the Holocaust. So let's get out of the theoretical and just talk another person's life. Corrie ten Boom's father was hiding people from the Nazis. They were found out, and her father was taken into prison, died in prison for trying to help people. Corrie and her sister were thrown in Nazi concentration camps where Corrie's sister would die in that camp. And all along, Corrie said they would walk the concentration camp praying because they knew this story. They knew this seems really evil. But I'm not going to shrink God down and say he's not in control of this. He's in control. We just don't understand what he's up to. So they'd walk the grounds just praying, God, bring about your purposes. This is really evil. And it was in that concentration camp that Corrie ten Boom's sister died. And when Corrie was finally rescued at the end of the war, she began to tour the world and tell her story. And this is the analogy she would use. She would say that life is often like a weaver's, what do you call the thing you're weaving? Basket, bloom, thank you. And we have a photo of, this is an illustration she would use, where God is like the master weaver, she would say. And there are times where he would weave these dark threads into our story. And we'd be like, God, what are you doing? This feels awful. This feels like a mess. This doesn't feel right. I mean, how many of you look at that and you're like, that's what my life feels like right now. It's a mess. I don't understand it. I don't understand how God could allow this string to come through. And what Corey would say is, you need to keep going to the end of the story. And here at the end of the story, she says, when you flip over that tapestry, you will see that God has been crafting something more beautiful than you could ever imagine. And here at the end of the book of Genesis, we finally see the tapestry flipped over. And we finally see what God was weaving this whole time through all of these painful stories. We see God was, he allowed them to sell him into slavery because God was like, I'm going to use that and redirect it and turn it for good. I'm going to put Joseph in Egypt where Pharaoh's going to have these dreams and Joseph will be able to interpret it and people will be saved and I'll get glory. And I want you to notice this. It's not just that God's the ambulance driver and shows up and fixes what went wrong when his brothers sold him into slavery. By the end of the story, God actually heals the brokenness in the family that was present well before his brothers made these decisions. We end the story not with brothers divided. Where did we see earlier? We end the story with Joseph on his deathbed, surrounded by his brothers, surrounded by his family, recounting that God has been faithful, that God has been good, and he has indeed been weaving a beautiful tapestry this whole time. And that is why we love this story. Because it shows us God is in control and he is so good, he can bring even great good from great evil. And it's easy to see when you have the end of the story. But it's a lot harder to see that and believe it when you're sitting in prison. Amen? And you have to imagine, Joseph had days in prison where he's like, God, what are you doing here? Why are you leaving me here? You gave that guy a dream. I interpreted it, and he forgot me. What are we doing here? And this, I would submit to you, is why God has given us this story. So that we can look at this and know what our God is like. So that we can look at this and go, I might not understand why he's weaving this in here right now, but I know who my God is. I know whom I believed in. And I know that he is strong enough and good enough to bring great good from this. So I'm going to cling to him until that faith becomes sight. This is what Joseph did throughout his story. And I'm telling you, I think this is why Genesis slowed down so much to give us so much detail on the Joseph story. Because God's not going to tell us all of the details of our life, because otherwise we wouldn't need to trust him. We wouldn't need to have a relationship with him. We could be our own gods. Instead, what God does is he shows us, here's what I'm like. I love you. I'm for you. Here's proof of it. Now, will you trust me and walk with me? Let's go. This is what this story is here to do, to engender that trust. And I'm telling you, it's not just the story of Joseph. I have been telling you week after week after week that Genesis is only the book of beginnings. We are this far into the Bible. The story of Genesis and the story of Joseph is really preparing us for a much greater story, and he's the one the Bible is about. Who is it, church? Jesus. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to invite the band back up, and I want to tell you about Jesus one last time from the book of Genesis. So here's what happens. Joseph, right? Remember, we end, and on his deathbed, he says, hey, God's been faithful to me. He is going to visit us. I know he'll carry us out of this land. And 400 years later, God does exactly as he promised. Flip over to the book of Exodus. You could read about this week. He visits his people. He brings them out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. And he begins to carry them towards the promised land. And along that journey, they end up wandering for 40 years because they're whiners and complainers. And seriously, tell your kids this. Whining is a sin. Seriously, God The people break faith with God, and so he's like, hey, I'm patient. I'll raise up a new generation. He raises up a new generation, brings them to the promised land, and they're not so different like their fathers or their forefathers before them. And just like Joseph's brothers, just like their parents, just like you, just like me, they mess it all up. God gets them into the promised land, and they break faith with God, and rather than running to him, they run from him. And to make a long story short, that lands them outside of the promised land and in exile. And the question becomes, is God done with us? He visited us, he brought us up out of this land, but we messed it up. Have we outsinned his love? Has he changed his mind about us? They're asking the same questions Joseph's brothers were here asking. And God's response to that is he begins to send prophets. We're going to look at one of them next week, where he says, I have loved you with an everlasting love. And I brought you this far, and I'm not going to give up on you now. And so what he promises to do through these latter prophets, he says, in the latter days, I'm going to send my son. So prepare the way of the Lord. And finally, in the fullness of time, Jesus comes into human history. And he reveals the God that we have been glimpsing in Genesis all of this time. And when he comes, Jesus is treated a lot like Joseph, where he is rejected by his brothers, where he is betrayed and thrown in a pit to die. Only unlike Joseph, Jesus actually dies. And on the cross, Jesus takes what was meant for the greatest evil in human history, the murder of God himself, and he uses it for good. He says, I will take their sin upon me and take it to the grave and leave it there so that all who trust in me can truly be forgiven. Not just have a little bit of time, but have eternal life through a restored relationship with God so that they can walk with us, just like Adam and Eve did in the garden. Jesus, I've been telling you every week, is the one that Genesis has been preparing you for. I'm telling you, that's where Genesis begins. It ends with saying God will visit us. There is a day coming where Jesus will visit us once again. And for all who trust in him, he will take us to our heavenly home, where there will be no more tears, no more pain, no more suffering. And in that place, we will flip over the tapestry and see what he's been doing in history, and we will sing praises to the name of our sovereign and gracious King who loved us and gave himself for us and brought us to this place, just like Joseph and his brothers do at the end here. This is the day that is coming for us. And until then, we look to Jesus and we remember that our God, that our Jesus is the same God we've been seeing in Genesis. That Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And if he did it for Joseph, he will do it for all those who love him and are called according to his purpose, in the words of Romans 8:28. So it has been a joy to study the book of Genesis with you. I want to leave you with Jesus and give you some time to respond to him. Let me pray for you, and then we'll give you some time to respond to Jesus, however you need to do that this morning. Jesus, thank you for loving us. When we were at our worst, when we were running from you, just like you came after Adam and Eve in the garden, you called to us, so you call to us through your word now. I pray that you would send your Spirit to fill us with faith, that we would not doubt that you could truly forgive our sin, that we could believe that your cross is big enough to cover any sin, any family, any mess up. And Jesus, where we have shrunk our view of you, where the pain of this world has just beat it down, I pray that you would get our eyes up like Joseph and stretch us to see your goodness and your kindness and to trust your hand in our life. Meet us here in this place, we pray, in your beautiful name. Amen.